It was the seventh floor of the Grand Plaza Hotel when everything changed. Alexander Stone, America's most ruthless businessman, was returning to his presidential suite when he heard muffled crying coming from a cleaning cart in the hallway. He approached irritated, thinking it was a forgotten television left on in some room, but what he found left him speechless. A newborn baby, hidden among clean towels and sheets. Next to the cart, Emma Rodriguez, the 23-year-old housekeeping staff member, looked at him terrified, with tears in her eyes. She didn't know she was about to be fired for violating the hotel's strictest regulation. She couldn't imagine that this man everyone feared, known for never showing mercy in 40 years of business, was about to surprise her with a reaction that would forever change both their lives. Because sometimes it takes a crying baby to awaken the humanity in a heart that thought it had lost it forever. Emma Rodriguez looked at the hotel clock with growing anxiety. It was 2:30 in the afternoon, and little Marcus had started getting restless in his makeshift hiding place among the clean linens of the cleaning cart. At 23, Emma had been a single mother for 6 months, after the baby's father disappeared when he learned about the pregnancy. The babysitter had called that morning at 5 a.m., sick with a high fever, unable to take care of Marcus. Emma had no one else. Parents dead in an accident when she was 18. No siblings. Friends all busy with their own lives. The choice was dramatic. Lose her job by not showing up, or risk everything by bringing the baby with her. The Grand Plaza Hotel wasn't just any place. 5-star luxury, international clientele, ironclad rules. The manager had made it clear from day one that any violation of regulations meant immediate termination, and the regulations categorically prohibited the presence of family members during work hours. Emma had hidden Marcus in the cart at 6 that morning, hoping he would sleep for most of her shift. She had brought everything necessary: bottles, diapers, a small stuffed animal. Until that moment, everything had gone well. Marcus had slept peacefully while she cleaned rooms on the 5th and 6th floors, waking only for feedings that Emma gave him in the service bathrooms. But now she was on the 7th floor, reserved for presidential suites, where the most important and wealthy guests stayed. Just as she was about to enter room 701, Marcus began to cry. Not normal crying, but the piercing, desperate cry of a baby who was hungry and wanted his mama. Emma rushed to the cart, trying to calm him quietly, but the crying got louder and louder. Her hands trembled as she searched for the bottle, praying no one would hear. The hallway had acoustics that amplified every sound. She heard footsteps approaching, decisive, confident steps of someone with authority. Emma immediately recognized those footsteps. It was Alexander Stone, the most feared man in the hotel, who had been staying in the presidential suite for a week. Alexander Stone was 45 years old and CEO of Stone Industries, a conglomerate spanning from steel to technology. He was known throughout America for his ruthlessness in business, for the mass layoffs he ordered to increase profits, for his complete lack of mercy toward employees. He had never married, had no children, and everyone knew that the only thing that mattered to Alexander Stone was results. Emma froze, paralyzed with terror. Marcus continued crying, and now she could clearly hear the footsteps getting closer. She had no escape route. The hallway was long and straight, and Alexander would see her immediately if she tried to flee. She desperately tried to quiet the baby, rocking him in her arms, but Marcus was too small to understand. His crying filled the silent hotel corridor like a cry for help that no one could ignore. The footsteps stopped right behind her. Emma turned slowly, clutching Marcus to her chest, preparing for the worst. Alexander Stone was there, 2 meters away, dressed in a dark gray suit that cost more than her annual salary. His dark eyes stared at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. For long seconds, neither of them spoke. Marcus continued crying, unaware of the tension. Emma felt tears streaming down her cheeks, knowing her career was over, that she would no longer be able to support her son. Alexander looked alternately at her and the baby, as if processing a complex equation. Emma waited for him to call security, to order her immediate dismissal. Instead, what happened left Emma speechless. Alexander approached slowly, and with unexpected gentleness, reached out toward Marcus. The baby, as if recognizing a friendly presence, gradually stopped crying and looked at this stranger with his big blue eyes. For the first time since she'd known him, Emma saw Alexander Stone smile. Not the cold, calculated smile he showed during business meetings, but a real, spontaneous smile that completely transformed his face. Alexander Stone had never held a baby in his arms. In 45 years of life, he had built his existence on absolute control, efficiency, and emotional detachment. Yet, when little Marcus stopped crying and looked at him with those innocent blue eyes, something broke in the armor he had built around his heart. Emma watched in disbelief as Alexander, with uncertain but gentle movements, caressed the baby's cheek. Marcus, with that innate ability newborns have to recognize good souls, smiled and grabbed Alexander's finger with his tiny hand. In that moment, Alexander felt an emotion he hadn't experienced in 30 years. The last time had been when he lost his younger brother, Luke, in a car accident. Alexander was 15 then, and Luke was only 8. From that day, he had sworn to himself never to get attached to anyone again, to never suffer that much again. Looking at Emma, he saw something he recognized, the desperation of someone fighting every day to survive. Her clothes were clean but worn, her shoes comfortable but old, her hair pulled back in a simple but neat ponytail. She was a young woman trying to maintain dignity despite difficulties. Instead of calling security as anyone would expect, Alexander did something completely unexpected. He took off his jacket and put it over Emma's shoulders, who was trembling with fear and emotion. Without saying a word, he gestured for her to follow him to his suite, pushing the cleaning cart himself. When they entered the presidential suite, Emma was amazed. It was a 2,000-square-foot apartment with views of Central Park, furnished with period pieces and original artwork. Alexander had her sit on the leather sofa and went to the kitchen, returning with a warm bottle of milk. Emma watched in amazement as he gently took Marcus from her arms and began feeding him with a naturalness that seemed impossible. Alexander began talking about his brother Luke, much younger than him. When their mother worked, he took care of him. It was the first time Alexander had spoken about Luke to anyone in years. Watching Marcus drink the milk peacefully, memories came flooding back. Luke running in the garden, falling asleep in his arms, calling him Big Brother, with that sweet voice he had never forgotten. Emma observed this transformation in disbelief. The man everyone feared, who fired employees without batting an eye, was cradling her son with infinite tenderness. When Emma asked why he hadn't had her fired, Alexander looked at her for a long time before answering. He had seen in her eyes the same desperation he had felt at her age, and that baby had reminded him of something he thought he had lost forever. Alexander told her about his childhood, how he had to grow up quickly after his brother's death, how he had hardened himself to protect himself from pain. He had built an economic empire, but had lost himself in the process. Emma, in turn, told him her story, the death of her parents, the unexpected pregnancy, Marcus's father's abandonment, the daily struggle to make ends meet. She spoke of the constant fear of not being enough for her son, the guilt of not being able to give him everything he deserved. While Marcus slept peacefully in Alexander's arms, the two adults talked for hours. For the first time in years, Alexander felt he could be himself with someone. Not the ruthless CEO, not the unscrupulous businessman, but simply Alexander, the man who had lost his brother and had never allowed himself to love again. When Emma had to return to work, Alexander made a decision that changed everything. Not only would he not have her fired, but from that day on, Marcus could stay with him during Emma's shift. She no longer had to hide him. Emma looked at him as if he had just performed a miracle. And perhaps that's exactly what had happened. A miracle that had awakened humanity in a heart that thought it was dead. The days that followed were surreal for everyone at the hotel. Emma arrived every morning with Marcus, but instead of hiding him in the cart, she went directly to the presidential suite where Alexander was waiting. The staff began whispering confused, but no one dared question the decisions of the most important guest. Alexander had transformed part of his suite into a small nest for Marcus. Crib, changing table, toys. Every morning he was already ready to care for the baby when Emma knocked on the door. The transformation in Alexander was evident to everyone. During video work calls, Marcus would gurgle in the background, and instead of getting irritated, Alexander smiled sweetly. His colleagues were stunned to see their ruthless boss interrupt meetings to change diapers. Emma observed this metamorphosis with amazement. The man she had feared had revealed himself to be caring, patient, infinitely gentle with her son. Marcus had taken to Alexander as if he had always been part of his life. A week later, Alexander made an extraordinary proposal: to work for him as his personal assistant, salary 10 times higher, her own office, flexible hours, and above all the possibility of bringing Marcus every day. When Emma objected that she had no experience, Alexander replied that she had something more important: a pure heart and knowledge of what it meant to fight. Emma accepted and began working at Stone Industries. Alexander had set up a corner of his office as a nursery for Marcus. Employees were shocked to see the CEO arrive with a newborn, but even more shocking was the change in his behavior. Now he inquired about employees' difficult family situations, established corporate daycare centers, granted emergency family leave. Marcus became the office mascot. Emma discovered she had natural talent for organization and human relations. Alexander relied on her more and more, even for personal advice. One evening, working late with Marcus sleeping in his crib, Emma asked Alexander why he was doing all this. He replied simply that they had saved him, reminding him who he really was beneath years of hardness. Emma felt tears streaming down her cheeks, understanding that what was developing wasn't just gratitude, but something much deeper. The months that followed were the most beautiful of Emma's life. Working alongside Alexander had allowed her to discover not only her professional abilities.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
But also a happiness she thought was no longer possible. Marcus grew surrounded by the love of two people who adored him. Alexander had completely transformed his approach to life and business. Stone Industries became known for being one of the most employee welfare-focused companies in America, establishing support programs for single mothers and work-life balance policies. Marcus, now 8 months old, had started crawling and had transformed Alexander's office into a playground. America's most feared CEO spent meetings with his adopted son on his lap. One spring evening, as they returned home together to the building where Alexander had given Emma and Marcus an apartment, Marcus took his first steps. Emma was preparing dinner when she heard Alexander shout with joy from the living room. She ran to the living room and saw Alexander kneeling with open arms, while Marcus walked toward him laughing. Emma burst into tears of joy, and when Marcus reached Alexander, all three embraced on the carpet. In that moment, Emma understood that what she felt for Alexander was no longer just gratitude. She had fallen in love with the man who read bedtime stories to Marcus every night, who got up when the baby cried, who had transformed her life from nightmare to dream. Alexander, feeling Emma in his arms, and Marcus laughing, had the same revelation. He had never thought he could love someone after Luke, but now he had a real family, based on love and mutual choice. That evening, When Marcus was sleeping, Alexander confessed that he had fallen in love with her and Marcus, that he could no longer imagine his life without them. Emma replied that she too had fallen in love with him for the wonderful man he truly was. The kiss that followed was sweet and full of promises. That night, they talked about the future. They wanted to marry. They wanted Alexander to legally adopt Marcus. They wanted to build a family together based on love. 1 year after that first encounter in the hotel corridor, Alexander and Emma married in an intimate ceremony in the private chapel of the villa Alexander had bought for their family. Marcus, now 18 months old, served as ring-bearer, walking awkwardly toward the altar with a silk pillow in his little hands. Alexander's transformation was complete and stunning. The man once known for his business ruthlessness had become an example of ethical leadership and social responsibility. Stone Industries had doubled profits by implementing employee welfare policies, proving that economic success and humanity could coexist perfectly. Emma had discovered she possessed extraordinary talent for human resources management and corporate social responsibility. She had become director of the wellness department at Stone Industries, overseeing programs that helped hundreds of families in difficulty. Her personal experience allowed her to understand people's real needs and create concrete, effective solutions. Marcus grew surrounded by unconditional love. Alexander had legally adopted him immediately after the marriage, and the child called him Daddy, with the naturalness of someone who had never known any difference. He was a serene, curious child, full of life, who brought joy wherever he went. The evening after the wedding, while Marcus slept in his room decorated with luminous stars that Alexander had personally installed, the newlyweds sat in the garden of their new home to watch the real stars. Emma thought that everything that had happened before, all the difficulties, all the pain, had been necessary to bring them there. If she hadn't lost her parents, if Marcus hadn't been born, if the babysitter hadn't gotten sick that morning, Alexander added that if he hadn't lost Luke, if he hadn't built all those barriers around his heart, perhaps he wouldn't have understood how precious what they had was. They kissed under the stars, knowing they had created something extraordinary. Not just a family, but an example of how love can transform lives and heal even the deepest wounds. 2 years later, Elena was born, their second daughter. Marcus, now 3.5, welcomed his little sister with the enthusiasm of a proud big brother. Alexander discovered that his heart had infinite capacity for love. The more people entered his family, the more love he felt he could give. Stone Industries became a case study in business universities worldwide. The company Alexander had transformed from a profit machine to a model of social responsibility proved it was possible to do successful business while keeping humanity and respect for people at the center. Emma published a book about her experience that became an international bestseller. It told her story with Alexander and Marcus, showing how authentic love can overcome any social and economic barrier. During a conference, a young single mother asked her how she had managed not to lose hope in the darkest moments. Emma replied that she had never lost hope because she had Marcus. When you love someone more than yourself, you always find the strength to go on. Love isn't just a feeling, but a force that can transform the world. That evening, while putting Marcus and Elena to bed, Alexander looked at his family and thought about how much his life had changed. From a lonely, hardened man, he had become a husband and father. From a ruthless CEO, he had become an ethical leader. From someone who fled from love, he had become someone who made it the basis of every decision. Marcus, as Alexander tucked him in, asked to hear the story of when he met Mommy. It was a story Marcus loved to hear, even though he was still too young to understand it completely. Alexander began as always. Once upon a time, there was a very sad man who had forgotten how to love. Then one day he met a brave mommy and her special baby, and they taught him that love is the most important thing in the world. Marcus concluded by clapping his hands that they all lived happily ever after. and Alexander confirmed they still lived happily ever after. That night, embracing Emma while their children slept in the next rooms, Alexander knew that fairy tale was the most beautiful and true story he had ever lived. 5 years after that fateful encounter in the hotel corridor, the lives of Alexander, Emma, and Marcus had become a living testament to the transformative power of love. Marcus was now 6 years old and attended first grade, where he was known for his kindness and ability to include all classmates in games. Elena was 3 and was a little volcano of energy and sweetness, with her brother's blue eyes and her mother's bright smile. Stone Industries had become the first American company certified as Best Workplace for Families, an international recognition that rewarded the most advanced family support policies for working families. Alexander had completely transformed the corporate culture, moving from a model based on fear and competition to one founded on collaboration and collective well-being. Emma had become a national reference figure for working mothers' rights. Her department had created innovative programs that had been adopted by hundreds of other companies throughout America. Her personal story gave her unique credibility when speaking about work-life balance and support for families in difficulty. One spring morning, while getting ready for work, Marcus asked a question that touched both parents' hearts. He wanted to know why all his friends had only one daddy and one mommy, while he had a daddy of the heart and his real mommy. Emma and Alexander looked at each other, knowing it was time to explain Marcus's story more completely. They all sat together on the master bed, with Elena playing with her dolls beside them. Alexander took Marcus on his lap and began telling him the truth about his birth, how he was born from Mommy Emma and another man who then went away, but that he had chosen to become his daddy of the heart because he loved him more than anything in the world. Marcus listened carefully, then asked if Alexander loved him as if he were his real baby. Alexander answered firmly that Marcus was his real baby. It didn't matter who had brought him into the world, but who loved him, who took care of him, who would always be by his side. He had chosen him as a son, and this was the most important thing he had ever done. Marcus nodded with the wisdom of a child who feels deeply loved, then hugged Alexander with all the strength of his little arms. That afternoon, Alexander made a decision he had been considering for some time. He convened the entire board of directors of Stone Industries and announced the creation of the Marcus Elena Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to supporting single mothers and children in difficulty. He explained that this foundation represented the legacy he wanted to leave to his children, not just economic wealth, but the certainty that they would use their privileges to help those in need. The foundation began by offering scholarships, economic support to single-parent families, professional training programs for young mothers, and above all, free child care services for those who couldn't afford them. The first project was renovating the pediatric ward of the hospital where Marcus was born, creating welcoming spaces for mothers who had to care for their hospitalized children. Emma personally supervised the work, ensuring every detail was designed to give comfort and hope to families in difficulty. During the inauguration of the new ward, a young mother approached Emma with her baby of a few months in her arms. She told her she didn't know what this place meant to them, that she was alone as Emma had once been, and that seeing it was possible to make it gave her hope. Emma hugged that young woman, seeing herself from 6 years earlier, and whispered that she would make it, that the love she felt for her son would make her stronger than any difficulty. That evening, during family dinner, Marcus made an announcement that filled his parents with pride. When he grew up, he wanted to work in the foundation to help children like him, those who needed a daddy of the heart. Alexander felt tears streaming down his cheeks. The baby he had found crying in a cleaning cart was already showing he had inherited the most important thing, the ability to love and want to help others. Elena, from her high chair, clapped her hands, shouting that she also wanted to help children. Emma and Alexander held hands over the table, watching their children who were already dreaming of making the world a better place. They had created not just a family, but a legacy of love that would be passed down for generations. That night, while the children slept, Emma and Alexander went out to the garden to watch the stars, as they did every anniversary of their first kiss. Emma thought that that morning at the Grand Plaza Hotel, they hadn't just found love, but their purpose in life, to prove that love can truly change the world. Alexander kissed her under the stars, knowing she was right. Their story had begun with a crying baby and a man who had forgotten how to love. It had become proof that when true love enters people's lives, it can transform everything: hearts, families, companies, and finally, the entire world. Like, if you believe love can transform even the hardest hearts, comment which moment of the story moved you most. Share to inspire those who still believe in the power of family love. Subscribe for more stories of families born from the heart. Sometimes a crying baby can awaken lost humanity. Sometimes those who seem hardest hide the most tender hearts. And sometimes the most beautiful families are born not from blood, but from the choice to love. Because true love knows no barriers and can change anyone's destiny.